My name is Federico Sheppard. I've been an independent medical examiner for 36 years and a guitar maker for 40 years. The whole story of the death of Barrios began to unfold around a dinner table in El Salvador. I traveled there with Richard Stover in 2005, and at that point in time he was thought of as the principal biographer in the English language of Barrios, and we were discussing his death. And he never put it in print, but we spent the evening discussing whether or not Barrios was murdered. Well, we have to look at the circumstantial evidence. Here's the situation. Barrios was given a pension by the dictator, Maximiliano Martinez. In 1939, Barrios was caught with phony diplomatic papers, and he was escorted out of Guatemala and offered a teaching job and a pension in El Salvador. It really became the only stable home that he'd had in 34 years since he had left Paraguay. His common-law wife, Gloria, was a macumba. She was an exotic African Brazilian dancer, and some people think that she also engaged in black magic and voodoo and these kinds of things. Well, Martinez, the president, was thrown out of office in May of 1944, and then Barrios' health began to rapidly decline. Barrios had the intention of restarting his concert career and leaving his wife behind. They were going to separate. This has been reported by several people who knew the principal people living with Barrios at that time. She eventually, 6 months after the death of Barrios, married an Italian coffee plantation owner, Pasquale Cosarelli, who was living in the same house. Barrios and Gloria were now sharing the same bedroom, and Gloria was having an open affair with Cosarelli. Cosarelli, being a coffee plantation owner, would have had access to the common materials which made pesticides and herbicides, coffee plantation owner, arsenic, strychnine, and cyanide. The previous reports of the death of Barrios claim that he died of syphilis. There's absolutely no indication or medical evidence or proof that he had syphilis. In fact, he did not have any of the signs of syphilis. However, he had all of the signs of arsenic poisoning. Gloria, the black magic dancer wife, who was planning to leave him, was all of a sudden put under a lot of economic stress. She has a boyfriend in the house. She had the motive, she had the opportunity, and she had the access to the materials. Arsenic is colorless, tasteless. She did the cooking. Barrios developed a severe heart arrhythmia. The heart doesn't have a regular beat. In fact, it was so bad that his students listening to Barrios on radio from time to time could hear spaces in the music that they knew shouldn't be there, because his heart was so far off rhythm that he had to take a break. Barrios also developed a very, very severe case of eczema on his left arm, and he couldn't go anywhere in public without having his whole left arm covered. The two principal symptoms of arsenic poisoning are heart arrhythmias and eczema. Funny. But it's not funny. So the morning that Barrios died, he had been looked after by Roberto Bracamonte, who was quite a character, beautiful writer. He was in medical school, and Barrios had needed a little minor surgery thing about a week before he died, and he got an infection. Bracamonte was with him 24 hours a day at his side, made sure he got proper antibiotics, and really looked after him. And the morning that he died, Bracamonte left him in perfect condition and went to go and see his family. There's the opportunity. The only person with any medical training that was in the house was gone. Barrios was dead in 90 minutes. An acute arsenic poisoning results in death in 90 minutes. Interesting. Now, motive, opportunity, and materials. I took the study of this very seriously. I was able to inspect one of his 2 last guitars, and I was asked to make a repair of it in the museum. To clean the back of the guitar, to do the gluing, I was able to very, very carefully swab the inside of the guitar, and I kept the materials. They were, I was sent by the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory to McCrone and Associates outside of Chicago, and they performed a chemical analysis specifically looking for arsenic. There was no arsenic. Arsenic deposits itself in the fingernails and the hair. If Barrios was poisoned with arsenic over a long period of time, it would have taken about 6 months for the nail to grow out. Because he played on steel strings and he used to perspire a lot, the perspiration would carry the material from the nails to the interior of the guitar, and we would have our proof. So there's no arsenic in the guitar. That tells us he didn't get arsenic in his system from groundwater. He wasn't taking medications over a 9 or 10 year period that he owned this guitar. That the medication, was in his system. So it doesn't prove that he was poisoned with arsenic. It proves that he wasn't up until the last 6 months of his life. So interestingly enough, in my past career as a geologist also, I looked into sources of arsenic in El Salvador, and they, because of the volcanoes, have some of the highest levels of arsenic anywhere in the world, and toxicity from arsenic is actually a possibility. Now, to get back to this crazy theory that Barrios had syphilis, it's ridiculous. Number one, he didn't have the symptoms. Number two, the world's first blockbuster drug came out in 1909, and it was a syphilis cure based on arsenic. The formula was changed and improved in 1924 and also in 1932. Barrios had access to some of the best medical care. His cardiologist in El Salvador was the same cardiologist that the president Maximiliano Martinez used. So for anybody to suggest that he didn't have access to medical care is just ridiculous. So this whole syphilis thing is a very bad character assassination of the first degree. And curiously, it was only reported by the 2 English biographers, Charles Robert Salcedo, Google that name sometime, and Richard Dwight Stover. It doesn't appear in any of the other Spanish biographies. So where they came up with this is a mystery to me. Well, we honor the memory of this man. He became the first indigenous artist to be recognized as exceeding the level of culture of the conquistadors. That's the most important thing about Mangoré. He was a great guitarist. He was a great composer. He was a great poet. He was a great artist with pen and paper. But that's why he went through this transformational change at about age 45 and began spelling his name backwards. He wanted to prove that an indigenous person was capable of the highest level of arts, and he actually exceeded the level of Segovia, of course. We have eyewitness accounts of people who saw Barrios and Segovia within the same year, and they universally reported that Barrios was far better. So that's the key takeaway. Barrios grew up in an area where music had been brought to the Guarani Indians in the 16th century by the Jesuits, and music was revered in that society, and he was the process of almost 500 years of selective breeding. So that's really the story. He's a role model for indigenous peoples. a film has to be done about this man, an accurate film. He was the first, perhaps the first guitarist ever to fly to his concerts in 1929. He was flying up the rivers in Brazil. He went all through the Caribbean, all through Central America, and he was the last colored person to perform publicly in Germany 2 days before the ban on nigger jazz in 1935. 2 days. In the company of his black wife and his Jewish patron. If that's not the best story that there ever was. Barrios was truly a major figure, but he did not have the kind of personality that Segovia did, that wanted to dominate people. He just wanted to play his guitar. He had a very soft kind of a character. And he never had professional, with the kind of professional management that Segovia had. Barrios recorded first 13 or 14 years before Segovia, so Barrios really was a much more futuristic performer and composer. He played a different guitar over time. He added additional frets. He composed outside of the realm of the earlier Spanish composers. And he also needs to be thought of as a very futuristic person who advanced the art of composition, the art of the instrument making, because he extended the fingerboards. So for many reasons, he was the first indigenous artist to exceed the level of culture established by the conquistadors. Here you have, obviously, Andrés Segovia, the Spaniard, the conquistador, and the humble Mangoré, who died for love, the chief of the Timbuyas Indians, who, in the first confrontation with the Spaniards, didn't want to fight the Spaniards. He wanted to kidnap the wife because he was in love with her. So, as the story goes, the conquistador had to go back to the river to resupply, and Mangoré, the last chief of the Timbuyas, thought he had his chance to get the wife. And in the battle, Mangoré was killed. And later, in 1938, in the longest interview that Barrios ever gave, he sort of added a little bit to the story. I was born on the Day of the Dead in Mexico City, and I lived in the area where the artists lived and the diplomats lived. And there's some very famous mummies in a convent there in San Angel, in Coyoacán. And there's no doubt that Barrios would have been in that neighborhood. That was where people went on weekends, and especially diplomats. And he was supported by the entire diplomatic corps in Mexico City. So we know that he had exposure to the Day of the Dead. He arrived in Mexico City the first week of November, 1933. So the combination of the mummies and the Day of the Dead end up entering this legend of Mangoré that he told, and it was part of his concert delivery, and it was part of his persona. And in this retelling, the Indians mummified the body of Mangoré, and they kept him in a cave. And he returns to Earth every February 3rd to walk with his people. Now, why February 3rd? Interesting date. 2 times 3 is 6. Barrios was a theosophist, and the symbol of theosophy are 2 triangles. February 3rd is also the festival day, the feast day, the patron saint, San Blas, the patron saint of Paraguay. So he wove into the story just hints and numerology and a lot of things. A very important date for Mangoré, February 3rd. What day did Richard Stover die? February 3rd. Mangoré came to get him. Thank you for spending some time with us. Honor the master, teach children. We now have the method. The footsteps of Mangoré have been defined. Now, Where's the next Mangoré? I believe it's a child. And maybe that child can't afford a pair of shoes. Maybe he's in Tibet. Maybe he's in Thailand. Maybe he's in China. We don't know. But a genius like this comes along only once in 100 years. It's time to find the next Mangoré. Gracias.